Thank you so much. And it's always great to follow Judy because she covers a lot of ground, such a broad topic that one can't really do justice to it in such short bites. But thank you so much for the chance to share. So my brief presentation is actually going to take a slightly additional twist to what Judy has presented. And I'm going to try and talk not so much only about policy, but more also about practice. I think we've all been saying that we need to get onto the ground, and that's what I'm going to be sharing with you with some of the work that my colleagues and others have done. I'm really glad that Judy made this strong emphasis on systems. We really need to be thinking in a systemic way, and unfortunately, it's quite hard when KPAs in various government circles are delineated according to silos to get people to start to think at a policy scale, at least, in a systemic way. So I think that's an interesting arena for us to take forward in a governance perspective. But the climate system, very briefly, I'm not going to go through this because you all know this. The drivers of change are complex. The elements of the climate system is a complex system in itself. The ecosystems you've heard Judy talk about, but it's really this bottom box that I want to focus in on. And that's where Judy's already started to talk about some of the governance issues, but I want to try and bring in a few extra twists, if you like, to some of that. And I think the notion of systems, it'll be really great if the publication going forward from the session and these sessions could draw on the systems coming through as a link from the science through to the policy, through to the SDGs. Because if you look at the SDGs, it looks as like, some of us had a couple of stiff drinks when we put this all together, with all due respect, because that in itself, the SDGs are hugely interactive and all linked. And so, just to do an energy, food, water nexus assessment, which is now the latest buzzword for doing some science on this, it's really hard because how do you even get your head around energy at the moment in South Africa? So there's a systematic and systems approach that is needed even when we come to the SDGs. But what we do, we really honestly need to get to the action side, I think. And we are starting to make inroads, but I think it's still being buffered and almost compartmentalized too much. So this is from the initial report of the IPCC, also earlier report to the one that Judy mentioned of 1.5. And if we do make some conscious decisions, urgent decisions, we can get to the substantial mitigation scenario situation that you see in the one diagram. If we don't, Africa, as you can see, as we all know, is going to be really at risk. So I take the point about the time frames and how long it takes to get all this done, but the window is closing. We've been told that by various people. The United Nations have set out a strong warning to say within the next 5 years, everyone needs to be covered by an early warning system. How are we going to do that in 5 years? We're going to have to think super creatively and outside the box. So I just want to reiterate some of these things. I think, again, I don't have to go over these points. Those of us in the room know this. We're on a track. Global surface temperatures are rising. We're already past 1.1. We're trying to keep it below 1.5. And we've got scenarios. We either keep pumping it out, business as usual, no qualms, and then we hit whatever devastation we're going to hit, and maybe some huge opportunities, who knows. But if we take the hard measure, the light blue line, that's going to require, I think, some radical intervention as well. And why do I say that? You've heard Judy talk about the donut economy approach, and these are all wonderful heuristics that are really useful to get different stakeholders, and I like to rather call it actors, not stakeholders, because not everyone has a stake in the game. Some people are marginalized increasingly, and I think the fishing community have just recently, if I'm correct, Judy, maybe you can confirm this, have now been, fully acknowledged by the department, etc. So the games are changing in the sense of the buttons are moving, the levers are moving. But the point that I want to make there is to just show you that the impact of climate change, as Judy said, and I'm not going to go over this again, but the key things are extreme weather. Those of us who live in Johannesburg, we found that on Monday night, huge hailstone damage for various people, rising temperatures, sea level rise, and so on. But this is where I want to shift now the focus and really try and get my message across. So the one point I've made is we need a systems approach, but I'm going to push it even a little bit further. This is an old slide taken from the IPCC, which shows you the losses and the damages. And the loss and damage debate is hugely tense at the moment. Who pays, who benefits? Those who are the most marginally affected, where are they going to get the money from? What do we use it for? How do we monitor and evaluate that the money goes to the right people, and so on and so forth? But 2 quick points. No matter which way you slice this thing, the total economic losses look like, and I'm sure they're going to continue to always exceed the insured loss. So insurers are going to start getting really smart, I think, because you can't just keep on bailing out people. So that's going to require some very creative scientific thinking, I think. But also the numbers of the events are increasing. So as Judy mentioned, Southern Africa is hugely at risk. We're not alone in this in the Southern African region. It's projected to become systematically drier and drastically warmer. This is work that my colleague Francois Engelbrecht and I do at the GCI. We've been, working on these models, trying to get them better. And in particular, Francois is doing this internationally. He's currently in Geneva while we speak, talking about this early warning system for all. So multi-year droughts, coupled to an El Nino, which is the variability function of the atmosphere. What is that going to mean for heat waves? I can tell you not many cities are gearing up even for heat waves. Why? 2 points. Number 1, capacity. Number 2, the KPAs aren't aligned. So it's some interesting things we can start talking about. But other contexts also matter. And then I'm going to get into what I think is, I believe, needed for ocean work as well as any other work in this field. And that is that contexts really matter. I think Judy did make this point quite often in her presentation. It's all very well for us to talk from a theoretical level, from a policy level, but on the ground, when you're out there working with the people on the ground, fellow citizens who don't have the luxury of insurance, who don't have the luxury of being able to get water access, etc., the collapsing of service delivery in the country, as we're seeing it in our faces regularly, those are the issues that people are dealing with on a daily basis. So how do we then talk about climate change in a just way? And whether you're in the rural areas or you're in an urban context, this is taken just outside Johannesburg in Ekurhuleni. And there you can see people who are living in shack settlements. I don't need to belabor the point, but if we are going to have these heat waves, how do they cope? They don't have any air conditioning. And even those of us who do have air conditioning, we're struggling with energy. The show goes on. And here you've got issues of pollution, you've got issues of pipes, you've got issues of failed delivery of a service that was promised. Again, highly politicized, but we need to get our heads around that space. So Judy has spoken about sea level rise. Yes, the changes are quite subtle, but they do have systemic impacts. And this diagram from the IPCC, I think, is really useful for what I want to leave you with thinking about. So it's not only what's happening in the ocean, it's also what we're doing abstracting on land. So that interface between land and the ocean is critical. It's also important to understand that the ocean has its own circulation, and that's El Nino in a way, which might come to bite us, and already some are saying is going to perhaps bite us this summer. And then the exchange of water from glaciers going into the system, and if those are shrinking, what does that mean? But also then the whole issue of water expanding. So what do we do about these complex problems? And the cost, again, the projections going forward and what it might mean, whichever way, points to, I think, one crucial second message that I want to leave. And that is for really moving towards not only incremental science and incremental change at a policy level, but really starting to think now radically. I think the time has come for us to start being more transgressive. And I'll come back to that in a minute. What you can see there is if we do constant protection, putting the wheels back on the bus every time the pawpaw hits the fan. Sorry for the combined notions there. But if we really try and do enhanced protection carefully so that we don't get maladaptation, we could bring those impacts down. So let's come back to South Africa. This is where the rubber hits the road. This is where we live. And we've heard that coastal communities are highly at risk. So what are we doing? Deborah Roberts is a champion for us. Same with Judy. We've got many people in the policy space who've been shining the spotlight on what's needed. But even in Deborah's own backyard, There were huge problems with the case study in KwaZulu-Natal. And there's great work going on, which I'm going to try and share with, and then draw some threads through about what it means for our take-home message, I think, this morning. So we all know the KZN floods, climate system, exhibited itself in a rather drastic way. It overlaid onto current vulnerability, and Judy is well aware of this, as are others in the room. The vulnerability is critical together with the hazard, which drives the disaster. It's not surprising that people who are flocking into these areas are living in marginal landscapes. What are we doing about that planning situation? Where are we locating people, etc., etc. But 400 people died, 40,000 went missing. Some are still displaced, I believe. 4,000 houses were destroyed, more than 8,000 others, multiple infrastructure that is only now beginning to start to be attended to. But here's the bottom line. An estimated 17 billion worth of damage was incurred. And that is 17 billion rands worth that could have gone to other things. It could have gone to development. It could have gone to education. It could have gone to student fees. We know the NSFAS crisis, etc., etc. Instead, it's mopping up. So we've really got to get some of the stuff moving, and moving super fast. Otherwise, we're going to constantly just be going round the mountain playing catch up. So I bring these pictures a little bit more starkly to us this morning. That is what it looked like. And those of you who've been down to KZN know the realities of some of that and the impacts that are still happening for the tourist industry and for local livelihoods. But I've been super privileged to work with a group from UKZN, led by Kathy Sutherland on the science side, Sean O'Donoghue from the city side, also working with Deborah Roberts and others. But in particular, and this is the point I really want to leave you with, it's not just policy and science that needs to be talking to each other. It's implicit in what Judy was saying, but I think we really need to focus more on communities who need to come into this picture. We really need to be doing the science that elevates that voice that is often not in the room and around the table, because the communities are at the interface. They have solutions. They are not waiting for us as scientists to come and show them what to do. Yes, in some cases, there may be issues that we can help with, but they can also teach us what we need to be doing. So here's a bit of work that was done by Kathy and her team on flood early-based warning systems, but on the focus community-based, not flood early warning systems for communities, which is a different kind of approach. And I really want to stop here because I get very passionate about this, and I know Kathy gets passionate about it as well. Of all the impacts that occurred in the UKZN floods last year, Quarry Road, West Informal Settlement, was the only informal settlement that, according to date, never lost a life. Why did that happen? So I think Judy mentioned lessons learned, and I think we've also been running this forum so that we can draw out some of these lessons. And I would urge us to draw these scientists into whatever we produce in this, because it's really, their example is fantastic. So the Quarry Road West Informal Settlement took a number of years to set up. So yes, the time frame has already dragged a little bit, but they're at the cusp now of really multiplying this out and showing the rest of us what we can be doing. And I just want to draw a little bit on this. The flooding early warning system is a team, as I've told you, with multiple actors, including the city and the scientists. Disaster management is engaged. On the other side, you've got the South African Weather Services, and they are the custodians, the official, legitimate custodians who issue warnings. We can't have everyone with their models issuing a warning. So it's an interesting thing that we keep needing to remind ourselves of. But look at the nugget in the middle. That's where this group really made a difference. So they used technology to set up WhatsApp groups, and they worked in the community over and over again, telling them what is meant by disaster risk reduction, hearing from them what have they done in the past in terms of facing these floods, because this is not the first time this has happened, and so on and so forth. So NGOs were on a WhatsApp group together with the city officials, together with the university in one WhatsApp group. In another WhatsApp group, you had community leaders, UKZN, and so on. So it can be done. We can, if you like, get action onto the ground and not only just have fantastic policy and very high-level debates at COP, etc., but really on the ground. So Kathy herself has written this, and I've tweaked some of it. One of the things from their lessons learned from the Quarry Road experience last year was how to build back better. That's the disaster risk reduction slogan. I was involved in the DRR first policy that was developed in South Africa, but it's not just about building back. It's about building forward. I think we get stuck in, oh, let's fix up what the damages were instead of anticipating what's coming down the line. Planning in silos, we've all said that. We need a systems view, but we're not going to get that shift until we look at how government is rewarding work in these silos. They're rewarding work in these silos through KPAs, key performance areas. And I know this because I've worked in the cities. If you are not going to shift the reward system, why should someone who's delivering in a health sector even want to think about heat waves and heat health and climate change when they're not rewarded? Their daily job is to do something else. So that's something we really need to, I think, come back to. And then drawing on community knowledge and multiple actors, which has come through repeatedly this morning. So this is my third take-home message. I do think we can do incremental adaptation, which we've been doing. It takes us around the mountain one more time. Maybe we get a bit of an insight, but it's not enough. It's not enough just to fix the infrastructure, to plan a little bit better, to get a few more stakeholders in the room. We don't have time. We have to start to shift the gears. And you can hear how passionate I am. I've been working in this field for 35 years, 40 years. We cannot repeat where we've been going over and over with a few more extra slides in our presentations. So we really need to come to where Judy was making us look, transformative adaptation. But then what does that mean? And I think for science, it means a radical, transgressive shift. And I'm so grateful for the NSTF and the NRF and others. We're needing to shift how we frame our science that we're doing. It requires a new people-centric city planning approach. It requires envisioning, if you like, new communities, institutions, and economies. I would argue, as I've said already, that the reward system in cities is incorrect at the moment. It needs to be shaken a bit. The institution might even need to be radically shifted. And we need this deep, long-term, but notice the emphasis, systemic change. We cannot just be saying, oh, we need a behavior change. That's not enough. We're going to really have to think hard. So as I come towards the end of my presentation, I'm very, very fortunate to be working with colleagues in Norway, Karen O'Brien, Linda Signer, and others. Karen is leading the Transformations IPBES assessment, of which I'm very grateful to be a part. And we're really trying to think hard, all the authors who are working on this now, about what does this really mean? What does transformation really mean? We don't want to do kumbaya, blah, blah, blah anymore. We haven't got time. We need to get going. And so what she's done is draw another heuristic, very much like the donut economy, but I think more perhaps insightful in terms of what it may require personally, politically, and practically. And you'll see it refers to our beliefs, values, and worldviews. It refers to the systems and the structures, which I've tried to talk to this morning, as well as then the practical. So unless we ourselves are starting to think personally about this in our different actor spaces, are we cognizant of the different ways that people are looking at things? When I go into an informal settlement, am I really listening to where people are coming from? How are they surviving on a day-to-day basis before I show them a climate model and take them down a whole risk pathway, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't want to go into this. We've written quite a bit on it, and it'll be coming out, I think, in the IPBES assessment once that is due next year. But allied to this, another take on this from a friend of mine in Malaysia, similar idea, but coming from a very different context. And it has three aspects, and I really want to leave this with folks. Hardware, internal motivation for change. We, I think, are now at the point that unless we all get a hardware moment around this, it almost sounds like an Oprah kind of aha moment, but that's what we need. We need to be shifting. As my daughter often reminds me, though, she says, Mom, how can we even go and talk about climate change when people's day-to-day realities are just getting through the next day? And that's the point. We have to be starting to work with those communities like they did in Quarry Road, where the Quarry Road community actually started to drive how that whole system was put together. And then we mustn't knock science. Obviously, we're on a science panel here, and I want to be invited again for Christmas lunch or whatever. We also need the hardware. So we need the AI, but we need to be critical. What AI do we need? Is it going to take us down a rabbit hole? Do we only need certain sections of AI? And how do we trust that that's valid, et cetera, et cetera? So the technology is definitely a critical one. But for me, like Judy, I really believe the effort can be made in this policy, politics, institution, arts and social media space. We really need to be doing a lot more work in that space. And so as I end, I've been working a lot with artists, and I think we're a little bit perhaps arrogant as scientists, where we think of art as out there in another silo. And yeah, artists do cute things and, lacquer, and they make nice designs and sculptures and things. But, when we do talk about art, we use it in a communication tool sense. Well, I've been super privileged to work with Hanali Kutsia, who is a world-leading artist. She managed to take her science, her art, and work on it into a science perspective, not communicating, taking it and using it together with technology and together with the city for a planning tool. So her art is enabling us to, if you like, I'm taking off my glasses, put on a new set of glasses, look through the layers of art to see where we have gaps in our science. That's a different approach to only doing it for communication. Don't get me wrong, we need lots of communication, but it's not enough. We need to be shifting the paradigm. And here you see a picture. She designed an eco seat out in Victoria Yards, where her studio is based. Please do go and have a look at her studio, magnificent studio, embedded in the local context with those communities. And on the right-hand side, or it's on my right-hand side on my screen, you see the technical diagram. So she went to the city of Johannesburg and said, I want to design as an experiment an eco seat that will help with stormwater drainage flow when the storms happen. Because at the moment, pollution is normally in those flow streams, and then we have compounding floods. And she did. She worked with the city, and obviously now she has an evidence base that she can take into a planning context using art, not as a cute thing, but as a real player in the game. So I think these are some of the spaces that we need to be moving into. And so to end, I work strongly in transdisciplinarity, and I want to leave two clear messages about that. Transdisciplinarity is not about doctors talking to lawyers, talking to mathematicians. That is not transdisciplinarity. That's interdisciplinarity or multidisciplinarity, which we need. But what I've been arguing for through this whole presentation, and in particular with oceans, where there's so much wonderful, creative, beautiful opportunity to do this, we're needing what McGregor calls a fecund open space, where you get the political, social, historical, individual science coming in. On the other hand, you have environment, economics, cosmic, planetary, neuroscience. People in the neuroscience world are doing amazing things that we're not really drawing in fully, I don't think, in the South African context. And then in the middle is the really interesting space, the culture and the art, the religion and the spirituality. People's views on the world. How do they think? Where does this come from? And how can culture and art make a space for everyone? So as I conclude, we're not doing too well. We're doing very well in some spaces, and it's great effort. I've been involved in the IPCC. I've been involved now in IPBES, and we're all desperate to make this change. But if we look at the targets, we're falling short. And, despite all our efforts, we're really needing to, I think, become a little bit more humble, a little bit more listening, and I'm guilty of that as well. I'm so missionary driven in my science that I don't sometimes stop to listen to the actors who I'm engaging with. So where are we going wrong? And I think we are going wrong in that we are not being inclusive enough. We're not thinking harshly and critically about which institutions might need a radical change, and what areas in our science and our funding mechanisms need a transgressive shift. So my final slide. It's not enough to give people on the coastlands a document on how to build a treehouse. Really, not going to help much. And so we need to be really including local communities in addition to the policymakers that Judy spoke about. But the local communities have a richness of science from their perspective. And to end on a kind of sciencey note, it's the different epistemologies of knowledge that need to be brought into the room. It's not about tick boxing and saying we're doing transdisciplinarity. So with that, I want to say thank you very, very much for this wonderful chance to share. And I look forward to trying to help and craft something, a written thing, and maybe bringing in some of the folk from UKZN. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Prof Vogel. That was very thought-provoking, and I'm very glad that you've brought in this idea of a transdisciplinary approach. We also, because NSTF works with the hard sciences and with engineers, there is often this focus that is about concrete things, about how you build concrete things and you develop them and you innovate, right. and you'll do electronics, yes, and artificial intelligence, definitely, but but there's also natural intelligence, and we really do need to have a people-centered approach as well. So thank you very much indeed for that. Let me just have a quick look at the question and answer. Comments. Llewellyn says, great talk, Prof Vogel. Gordon Bronson says, thank you for this high impact presentation. Please can you mention your thoughts on the education perspective? Great contributions by distinguished Professor Haila Lotz-Sizitka, Saatchi Chair of Global Change and Social Learning Systems at the Environmental Learning Research Center, Rhodes University, and cross-posted on NORAC. And he gives a link there.
Yeah. So, in fact, I work very closely with Haila, and our publication for our work with the youth was part of that publication that Haila did with NORAC. So, we're working with her. We're on a community of practice, which I must thank the NRF for. I'm sure you're aware of it, where they bring universities together to work in a community of practice. And we're working on that, on education. And I think what's great about Haila's work as well is also this push for a more transgressive approach to how we educate. And so it's not, the sage on the stage, but really trying to draw in what people know and where they're at and communities. And we've just finished a very nice project that we worked on with them and Bristol University and a number of African countries, and the publications will be coming out. So yes, absolutely. There's a lot to be done, and Haila is the guru on this, and I would definitely suggest you have a look at what she does on this area. But yeah, lots happening in this space. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.